Okay, let's get started. I think the tape is rolling. Has everybody got a paper? Let's see. Well, Gary, I was gonna, yeah, or you could hand it to Gary. I know Gary needs one, so. But I think everybody here's got them already, but they've got them. But clearly, I'm not Howard. As everybody knows, Howard's moving on, so something said to be said for showing up, because I definitely don't have his intellectual skill, but I'm gonna cover it for June, and I'm going to just take. We'll see how it goes, but I think take each Wednesday and kind of dive in a little bit into a different character from the book of Esther. There's a lot of interesting. Side trails, whatever you want to call it, paths that you can go, and all that. But tell you what, let's first open with a prayer. Our God and Father, we thank you for allowing us to come together. Father, we thank you for the fellowship we enjoy together and friendships here. Father, thank you for your word and for this study of Esther that we've gone through over the last couple of months, and be with us tonight as we just dig a little deeper into some of the people in Esther, and help us to just always be encouraged to go into your word and see how your word connects us and connects so much of what we read and know in our faith. Father, thank you so much for your Son, Jesus Christ. In his name I pray. Amen. Thank you. So tonight, like I said, there's a lot of good characters. We've got, the main ones. We got, Esther, obviously. We got Xerxes. We've got Haman, Mordecai. And then there's even some, I don't know if we'll get into it, but I'm just looking into some of the roles that different other people played. There was the eunuch that guided Esther. There was some of they named the seven, what were they? The seven rulers that or the seven noblemen, I guess, that Xerxes went to say, what am I going to do about this? What do I do about this and all? But I mean, in quick summary, we've gone through this, but we know that Esther became a queen, really out of what we'd say the selfishness, the vanity of the king. She wouldn't appear, and some of you do it when you read a lot of stories. Of course, everybody, especially when you Google it and things like that, everything comes up. What was he really asking her to do? She was this noble woman, queen of Persia. She was hosting a banquet equivalent of his. He was hosting a banquet for all the men, poor. It was like kind of unprecedented. Everybody, and they drank at will. In those days, one author, I guess it said, in those days, and I think I've seen some of this on like some of the old British movies about the queens and stuff. The queen takes a drink, everybody else takes the drink. The queen puts her fork down, everybody else puts their fork down. Because it must have been like something about Queen Victoria or something on PBS. But that was the same then. If the king did that, so to him to have a feast not only with everyone from noblemen down to the poorest, the rules were let everyone, and let's see, I think he said it right here. It's by the king's command, in 1 verse 8, by the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. So this was like by 7 days, this was a really drunk, rowdy crowd of guys. And so this request to parade the queen, and there's even a lot of questions back and forth when he wanted Queen Esther to come wearing her crown. Was he meaning wearing her crown only? And things like that. And You know, we really don't know, but she refused, and you know, and the story, and of course, so we have Esther coming in, and we've gone over that. But I wanted to, so the character, the person I wanted to just dig into a little bit today is Xerxes. So just throw it out. Tell me what you know about, what you think, what you feel about King Xerxes. I don't know if you're saying Xerxes. You know, spit it out. I'm spitting out. But what have we learned? Maybe when you've read this, maybe you've had just an opinion. You know, like what a great guy, you know, or something. What a learned man. I don't know. Maybe you thought that. Maybe not. But what are your thoughts? We got Gary with the microphone, so keep him hopping.
This was the king that when Esther was a queen. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Hey, you know, at least he listened and he was somewhat benevolent. He wanted to raise awareness of her uncle.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot the guy's name right now.
Mordecai, yeah.
Because he had saved his life in some fashion, and then he didn't really want to kill the Jews, not really. So, I guess you could say he was somewhat benevolent.
Okay. I didn't go there. Anybody else?
Why didn't he do something for Mordecai when it happened, though? He must have been, I don't know, ambivalent or something. The men were killed because they said they were going to kill him, but he didn't do anything at the time. It just, when he couldn't sleep, it happened to be read to him and it came to his head. So I don't.
Okay, so you don't think he was benevolent? Okay.
I don't think he was that benevolent. And when
Irene
he
wants to
signed
say
the
something else.
papers, He said he signed the papers to kill all the
Yeah.
Jews on Haman's, and he really didn't pay attention to what was being done. He really didn't care.
Yeah.
Didn't affect him.
Okay. You want to add something else, Irene?
No, I just got the impression, when I read that part, was that when this happened with Mordecai, they put it in the record, the official record, but they never told him about it. He was always so protected, they never told him about it. He did sign the one about killing all the Jews. So, but my guess is that you just said it. He didn't pay attention that much. He must have not paid attention that much. Because as soon as it was brought to his attention, when they read the record to him, that's when he realized, oh, that guy must be all right. He saved me.
Yeah.
You know, and some kings and queens, in fact, some people, they're so close-minded that they won't even consider another way of being.
I don't think he was all bad. I think he was probably both, both, a little bit of both. And when you're in that kind of position, too, a lot of times people make decisions for you. He allowed Haman to do a lot of the, his own choices and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, over here, Gary. Go. We're keeping Gary going back and forth.
I was just thinking, since there are examples and stuff in the text pointing at both him being good in some ways and him being bad in others, I was wondering if maybe he was being influenced by Esther.
Oh,
he does clearly seem to like her enough to, let her stay around.
I think he, as much as he was the king, in those, it's so hard for us to grasp that, he was the ultimate, the only thing I guess he couldn't do, he could make new laws, but he couldn't change the ones in this. So you notice in the beginning, when Vashti refused, and you read it and they say, well, that would have been great humiliation to a noble woman to be paraded, even if it was fully clothed, to this crowd of drunken commoners and all this stuff. And one thing said they would expect, she communicated with the king saying this would not be right. And, it's all people see, all that's, research, speculation, whatever. But so, what was I going to say? He's the king, he's the ultimate, and it's like, he's also very, what do I want to say? Some of the stuff they said was one of the things I researched said he was known for acting impulsively. He loved beautiful women, and so he was. He was like, if it came in front of him, and he knew about it, let's do something. Vashti refused. He couldn't kill her. He sent eunuchs over to escort her. She refused. They could have dragged her, but they didn't. So what does he do? He asks his experts, besides the horror of all the other women are going to hear about this, and our wives will never do anything for us again. But they said, we'll make a law. So it wasn't an existing law. They made a law because she did that to say she'll be banished. Gary, yeah, you want to say?
I saw him as someone who embellished the role of king, and he enjoyed that position and maybe took advantage of that position in the parties that he had and that sort of thing. So when I saw him as just enjoying the fact that he's king, and people knew that he was king, and I saw him as a very weakling, a weakling. Yet, from a position perspective, he knew the strength. He knew the strength of that position, but it was a very weakling.
Yeah, very powerful. Yeah, because he was the law. He was powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's look back at on here in this first section. You'll see on the handout. I went back to find where he came from. So I didn't know if he was a king that built this kingdom, and like a lot of really wealthy, powerful people, he inherited it. It came. He's the top 1% or 1% of 1%. Yeah.
I want to say something like, when you think back at history, which, this is a long time ago, but something that we knew maybe growing up and taking history class, I'm sure Claudia knows a lot. You think about King Louis the 16th, the last king of France. He was just born into that, and they were considered, by God, they were considered
Yes,
king.
they were.
But, that caused a whole revolution, and people were starving, and he didn't want to be a king. He wasn't a bad person. He was just not a very good king,
Yeah.
And so I think about the same thing as him, that he was brought into that position, maybe.
Yeah, because it's just like you even saw it with the crowning of King Charles. All the religion, the religiosity, they were preordained for that role. He was taught. And you see those shows about Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria, they were taught, you are ordained by God to lead these people. Yeah, and I've always said when we've gone to Europe, I've always said it's like you go see those palaces and cathedrals, and you're like, that's why we separated church and state, because the church and the government, if they're the same thing, they're corrupt, and all. But anyway, but here, so you'll see here, so Xerxes' great grandfather was Cyrus the Great, and he was like the first king of Persia, and he had done a couple things different. So he came into power, and it was around 559 or something, and he was a small, and that's what they all wore. And if you go to Europe and these countries, you see all these little castles, and there were kings for just these little communities, little areas and stuff, and all they did was fight each other. And he, in 559 BC, he became king of Persia, North Assyria, Armenia, and Asia Minor, and that was before. And then in 539, he took on Babylon. But what he had done was, let me see, he had I didn't write down here, but when he did that, he fought a couple battles, but then he convinced some of the other king's armies to join him, instead of fight, and so one of the things that Cyrus the Great did was he inaugurated a new policy in the treatment of conquered people. Instead of tyranny, he treated subjects with consideration, particularly in regards to religion, And so this led to a great era of peace. And that's also, so Cyrus came, and it's like, and he also, an interesting thing is, so in 539 then is when he took Babylon. And anybody, somebody want to read, I forget what it is, it's Daniel 5. Let's see, gotta remember where my notes are. I just wrote Daniel 5, but I think it's at the end. Remember the story of the hand appearing and writing on the wall?
Daniel 5:5.
I don't remember.
Suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on
Yeah, let's read that loud. Yeah, that's the one.
Suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale. He was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belshazzar, was found to have keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for the Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means." So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple, have a gold chain around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave you Father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from the people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys, and he ate grass like an ox, and his body was drenched in the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on the earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised gods of silver and gold, or bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, Tekel, Parson. Here is what these words mean. Meaning, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, and gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest and the ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. And that's a lot of reading.
Yeah, it is. I didn't. I guess I did. But so what he was doing, they were using holy goblets for the temple for a drunken party and stuff. But meanwhile, Xerxes and his army were coming to Babylon. And when, it doesn't quite say it, but right after this, they're saying, is when Cyrus took Babylon, and they opened the gates. They didn't even fight. You know, this Cyrus is very wise, or very smart about things. So possibly Cyrus took Babylon when Daniel was there. Daniel it would make sense he would seek him out. He was known for being one of the wisest people. So I mean, I just thought this started becoming a real intertwining connection. But but they say, they advanced on Babylon and they opened the gates because they knew Belshazzar had offended the God of the Hebrew people. He had used the holy relics in the temple for drinking out of, which kind of almost, what did Xerxes used all these goblets. It was all about me, I'm great, I'm powerful, I've got all this great splendor, and everything. So yeah, definitely. But so then I wanted to read. Let's see. Would someone open up to Isaiah 44, verse 28, and I want you just to read 45, verse 1. We'll give Gina a break. Anybody want to read that? I wore Gary out. I got a replacement already. Isaiah 44.
I heard Hosea too.
Verse 28, and then just through the first verse of 45. Isaiah 44, verse 28, through chapter 45, verse 1.
You said 44:28?
Yep.
Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please? He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundation be laid.
Did I get the right one? Okay, let me get here and check my notes. Come on. Then. This wouldn't happen to Howard, just saying.
Verse 1 of 45 does mention Cyrus.
Okay, yeah, 45 verse 1. Read that real loud again. Did we get 45 verse 1?
This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Let's read that first two sentences again. Verse 1, the first two sentences of verse 1.
This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him.
Okay, that's good. So Isaiah, which was 140 years before the temple was destroyed, is prophesying Cyrus. So Xerxes' great-great-grandfather, it's being, he is not a Jew, he's not a Hebrew, and he was prophesied that he was going to not only become a great king, almost easily, very differently than a lot of others, but he was going to lay the way, save God's people and stuff. So, and he did that because he's the one, he took over Babylon, and they had been slaves. And then his way of treating people and respecting religions in some manner, I guess, kept them there. So when they had the first, what am I calling it, diaspora, when the people went back to Jerusalem, it was actually, I never really heard that before, but it was actually a very small group compared to all of them. I couldn't find numbers, but it was a very small group of Jews that went back because they had started being spread. Because they'd gotten established there. They'd been there a long time. It was a lot more. They'd become very secular, so to speak, and so that's probably why in Persia there were still so many Jews, because it was where they'd been living. It was where they could make a living, and like that. So I just thought it was real interesting that could you imagine Cyrus took Babylon. He's already a great king, and they say there was and of course Babylon had also were very, they documented, they have everything, and they say some people speculate Daniel was there and pointed him to the prophecy of Isaiah and said, our God prophesied that you would do this, and everything. I mean, just kind of like, I guess I tend to, bad habit of mine, just when I'm reading Esther, I'm compartmentalizing it, and I'm not doing that much connecting of way back. So, I mean, talk about, so we, in some of these, we talked of the king and the power and the authority and all this stuff, but God, hundreds of years before that, prophesied, told him who was going to be doing this, and so and they said Xerxes also, he was very into religion. They said, what's some of the, I forget some, they rattled off a lot of different religions. It says it was very probable that when Cyrus took Babylon, he found Daniel there, who had been long famed as one of the wisest ministers of state in all the East. And it is most likely it was that person who pointed out to him the prophecy of Isaiah and gave him those further intimations relative to the divine will. I mean, but could you imagine reading something like, a prophecy that someone wrote that you've never heard of, or maybe heard of, and it's got your name in it, kind of like, like, I think so. I don't think I can imagine that being as a couple times, somewhere along the way, your parents had said something, and then as an adult, you do it, and you're thinking, oh my gosh. And I'll tell you a funny one I always think of. I remember the first time I yelled at my kids for standing. When we lived in New England, we didn't have air conditioning. In the summer, they would open the refrigerator door and just to cool off. And I grew up in Miami with no air conditioning when we were little. And we would stand in front, and we'd just crack open the refrigerator door, and then all 5 of us kids would eventually get there, and we'd have the door open. And then my dad, from 2 rooms away in the living room, would yell, "Close the refrigerator door, we're not the power company, the Florida Power and Light." And we used to think, how does he know that? Of course, now I know he felt the cold running across the floor because it was like 90 degrees. And so the first time I yelled at my kids, "Close the refrigerator door, we're not the power company," I was like, it's... And I'm sure there's probably, some of us have had maybe some deeper meanings of things, but Gina.
We did that in Texas, but I think it was, we don't have a contract with the Edison Company.
Is that what they say? Yeah, I don't know where they get this from, but
We used to hover around the heater because it would get cold, and we had a floor heater, and it would get so cold off in the back bedrooms, you don't have central heat. And I remember just one time scorching my gown because of just trying to stay warm.
yeah, but but this is like dealing with, higher power, which I said is probably part of his interest. He was also very interested in, somewhere in there it had a whole list of all the different, he was like, what do you want to call it, spiritual but not religious, but into all the, the powers that can help him predict and do things like that.
Wasn't it the Greeks that Paul talked about, that they had all the gods?
Yeah,
didn't
they had
wanna
one for
offend any
everybody.
in
Yeah,
case they
so he was
missed somebody.
kind of like that, and
Yeah.
his great great grandson would try to invade Greece, and that was one of his big faux pas. But yeah, interesting. But
Yeah, Mike, I got really into like the ancestry one time, and talking about going back and the connection with your familial connections and stuff. And I found it so interesting that you go back in time and you find out you've got like teachers in your family or judges or of course we probably had some outlaws too, but but just the connection. And a friend of mine, her dad was adopted when he was a little boy, and he didn't know who his birth parents were. He never really cared, but she was really into wanting to know who her real grandmother was. So she did research, and she became an RN to find out that her grandmother was a nurse.
yeah,
And just that connection, that how can that be,
But I just think that's such a great connection of, and you also think of, and it probably happens everywhere, but think of how many times, especially in the Old Testament, we read about we've got this great king. Then his kids or his kids' end up being really bad kings, evil. It doesn't take long to just ruin a whole nation all. And so and that's what Xerxes was doing. So he just had this hunger for lust, for power, for greatness. And you see right in Esther, right in the beginning of Esther, when he's doing he says put it in here, let's see. Yeah, like in 1:4, and it says, for a full 180 days he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. So he wasn't just saying, look at these great, they described the palaces he built with cedar from, hundreds, thousands of miles away, everything gold-plated, stuff from other countries that they'd taken and all. But it wasn't just that. It was, it was my majesty, his majesty, even though the bulk of it was established by his great-grandfather. I mean, he held on to it, which probably was no small feat, but and I think that's what God really sees is when we're doing it when we're putting ourselves there. It's all that. But he says, so yeah, and that's when they talk about the banquet and every cup. Where is it? The garden's hangings, couches of gold, silver, and it says that wine was served from goblets of gold, each one different from the other. This was for this is a big crowd, and all, but that's just he just had such excess and all that, but so his great grandfather was the one who was probably why so many people stayed in their war. It's probably why Persia, Iran, all that area, they used to be the intellectual centers. That's where people went to trade. That's where people went and, with all this wealth, they had fabrics and just, what do I want to say, craftsmen that could do. The people came from all over the world to go to these areas, and also, but that prophecy is when I kind of read that, and I've read it before, but I never paid attention who Cyrus was. Now I know who Cyrus is, and it was like, okay, whoa, but so Xerxes himself, he also is like in the Torah and stuff, he's called Ahasuerus, if I'm saying that right. So in some writings and stuff, that's the name for Xerxes. I don't know if that's more Hebrew or Greek or something, but his empire ranged from India to Kush, which is like the Upper Nile. So that's like, large part of Asia. And this is the only part I could find some numbers on. Approximately 50 million people in his kingdom. If you can think, back, that's a lot of people when you don't have email, or cell phones, right? And it was approximately 44% of the world population at the time. So, I mean, Xerxes had a big plate, or gigantic plate, but a lot of his empire was inherited thanks to a great granddaddy. He possessed abundant riches and was proud to show off, and then, like we just read, displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. And a lot of things to say. He acted impulsively. He loved beauty, especially women. He was big on buildings. So he was very, and like they said, he was very impulsive, to where if he was obviously partied and drank all the time, so if he wanted the queen, or of course he had concubines all over the stuff. And like I said, even when Mordecai went to Esther, it'd been a month since he'd seen him, and she was, so he wasn't. He was known to be a major womanizer, so it wasn't like he was like abstaining till he sees his wife in a month. That's not how he lived and stuff. But he did so many building projects, they were nearly bankrupted. For some reason I forgot to write it down here, but he had a failed invasion of Greece. He'd been trying to take Greece, and he did he was going to try to get all his troops to cross some ravine or valley or river or something, and instead they just they were led into a trap and like defeated and stuff. But he still had all this stuff after all that. He still had all this, but his people really didn't like him. I mean, he had to deal with numerous rebellions, and in 465. So I always have to think backwards of what did we say? He was from 485, he was king, to 465. So like 20 years he was king. And so and he met Esther in his 7th year of his reign. So they were king and queen for 13 years. And but in 465 BC, Xerxes and his son Darius were assassinated by a guy named Artabanus, who was a powerful figure in the Persian court. So it didn't. He just had his lavish living and corruption. Just was eventually people they said. And if you remember, Mordecai revealed a plot to take Xerxes' life. Almost the same thing. Someone in the court was turning on, and Mordecai overheard them. So Mordecai actually prevented it happening. Maybe it wasn't even the first time, but he prevented that from happening. But he didn't this next time. And like I said, it's just how this call it like a generational thing. Do we feel? I sometimes feel maybe my kids don't appreciate what they have because they didn't, I didn't grow up with it, so I think they ought to be pretty impressed. And they just, it's what they grew up with, so they're not impressed. It's just the status quo. And I think that you see this here. He just, he never had to really work for it, so he didn't handle it properly. And of course, it led to his downfall. But I think we do that. We can even do that. I think we do that in our faith. This is all still ties to our faith, and there's so many, even though not direct quotes, but there's so many parallels in just life and Christianity, the faith. Why don't our children have as strong a faith as we have? Why things that we wouldn't think of, wouldn't even consider, they don't seem a big deal or something. And but so Xerxes was was saving the Jews, his destiny. He did it because and I would say he did it because he was kind of, he learned someone was trying to hurt the queen. And he loved her. Maybe he lusted her more than, he's very physical. So I don't know if he was benevolent. I think it's just somebody was messing with his queen, his property, you would think, and he turned like that. It was a conversation. If we read in Esther, it's she had the second dinner, and she reveals what's going on, and let me see how it is, and let me get the correct thing. And besides, Haman was already sweating because he had to go and parade Mordecai around. But when Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this vile Haman. Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine. Interesting that they managed that. Isn't that just interesting that's in there? He was so mad he didn't even take his wine with him. I mean, it's just, this guy's a piece of work. And he went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. And just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. And people said he was probably just on his knees, just like, please save me. And the king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? And as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face, which there's always a bunch of people around. Those people are never alone. And it's like, no one had to even question, what do you want us to do, king? They know the procedure, because this happens a lot, is to cover his face and then drag him out and how he's going to be killed and all. So I think what's interesting, I tried to look, when I looked up Xerxes, I was saying, was saving the Jews Xerxes' destiny? And in a way, he did that, because he could have gone the other way and said, hey, look, it's been a year, I'm due for another wife. He could have, done anything. But like Irene said, he did. He did it for Esther, but when you look at, so you'd think him doing that or allowing them to do that. Now, a lot got recorded about Mordecai and things like that. But when I just Google and search around some of these, I went to thetorah.com, a couple of these, these authors and stuff. But I went to Google because I want to see what's just history say about King Xerxes, and it just listed tyrant, selfish, womanizer. It didn't even mention that he saved the Jews. So his nasty deeds far outweigh his good deeds. Or his good deed, and as far as history leads to, but then he didn't live much longer. It must have been 13 years or so after is when he was long. And then, just looking up, we were talking earlier, some of the experts say probably there's not any record of how Esther died or Mordecai and all, but they kind of assume once Xerxes lost, that was the tradition. The king's gone, his family, his court, they're all gone too, So, I mean, they were for a very short time, they accomplished some pretty major things and stuff. But I think too, I just put down here at the end just the scripture in Esther 4:13 through 17, where Esther is questioning. I haven't even talked to the. Let's see. I haven't even talked to the. Let's see. I forgot what she said. 4:17, 13. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, when she said, "I haven't been summoned for the king for the month," you can get killed if you do. She said, So do not, and he said, and I always thought this seemed kind of harsh, but do not think that because you are the king's house, that you are in the king's house, that you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. So Mordecai had great faith, even though, everything sounds like he wasn't particularly a religious Jew. They couldn't have been in that time. But and you and your father's family perish, and who knows but what you have come to a royal position for such a time as this. And then she sent the reply to fast, and everyone fast, have all the Jews fast, which was, was just, she knew how to understand the seriousness of it at that time. But I think, that's just, God would have, if Esther didn't do that, God would have used somebody else, or something. Not that there was a choice, but.
It doesn't tell us in the Bible, but in some of the things I read, they said she probably was only 14 or 15 years old.
Isn't that crazy?
Isn't that crazy? So you think of a teenager having to deal with all this, that must have been.
Yeah. Well,
really
I'm sure
hard.
all that being in the for the year, being trained in the year, they were teaching them not just how to look good and dress, they were teaching them how to talk, because once you're in the palace, everything you do is recorded. That was what they did, and that's why we know so much about it too. And so I'm sure they trained them to speak. You know how you think, did they really talk this way if it pleases the king? But they did, and it's recorded that way. But they were taught to talk. You just didn't grow up learning to talk that way. Once you got into the palace, you learned how to do that. So, yeah.
Even King Solomon, you read about him and all the riches and glory that he had and the wisdom that he asked God for wisdom, and God gave him wisdom. He had, 700 wives and all those concubines. And I'm thinking, what do you do with all that, for crying out loud?
Yeah. And then he, at the end of his...
That's hard as
Right.
a woman, in, thinking of a woman and having a husband and wanting a faithful husband. It's really hard to understand how that was even...
Yeah, well, and one of the things we might go into, I read this really interesting article called Queen Vashti refused consent and agency in the book of Esther, and it's just about who has the ability to express opinion. And even Esther, all the way up until this happened, they didn't say, do you want to join? Do you want to try out to be queen with all the beautiful virgins in the kingdom? All the beautiful virgins went, nobody and all this stuff. She didn't, so she had to, and it talks about kind of the power dynamic. And when she became queen, and Vashti had power, and she had the power to say no. She wasn't killed. She was just banished, and who knows what kind of life that was. But the queen, it still goes to the king. If you're close to the king, you have some power. But it's like Haman, it can, that was just, it wasn't like the king had to think about it.
Yeah, she risked her life just
Yeah.
going to him.
Yeah, right.
He didn't summon her, she could have been killed.
Right, yeah.
You're thinking, that's his wife, crying out loud.
But she knew she'd be better looking walking in there than Haman, I guess, or something. But it's the, God will work it out.
As women, I think, to accept that.
Oh, it is. But it was that life the women had literally no choice. Just if they were in a good position, they could use. And remember when it talked about Haman's family? They were all celebrating him, and then he says, I had to parade this guy Mordecai around, the guy I wanted to kill. And then they're all like, you're dead. And they were all probably disappearing because they would be too. It's just that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's what I had. Irene, yeah.
I think the challenge for us is to see how this goes on today.
Yes.
What we're reading about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still going on.
Yeah.
Human beings don't seem to learn very well.
True.
Thank you.
And my only consolation is God created this way for a reason. I don't know what I would, but great. But yeah, so we might talk about that power struggle next time, and also. But thank you. Let's close with a prayer. Our God and Father, thank you. Be with everyone as they leave tonight. Keep everyone safe, Father. Be with those of our number who are traveling and who are ill and struggling. Encourage them, Father, and help us to reach out to them. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.